Hi, Allison Samuda here, and I am so thrilled to welcome Star Saxene, who is somebody that I've admired for a couple of years, and we've started to connect with one another over the past year. And I'm just so thrilled to have a conversation about hacking assessment, amongst other things. So, welcome, Star.
Thanks so much, Allison. I think you and I have so much overlap that it's cool to have this conversation with somebody who has as much personal context as you do.
That's right. So let's start diving right into the idea of hacking assessment and the reason why, from the first edition, which was close to 6 or 7 years ago to now, what really has become clearer to you as you continue to think and work and consult with so many schools around the world?
So, one of the major things that shifted, I think, is that when I started, I don't know that I thought about what I was doing as an equitable practice so much as one of the things that I'm noticing now is that when you're looking out for what's best for each individual kid, you are pulling on that equity string. And so, as I've become more aware of my own learning around equity and my own biases and the things I've been working on myself, post pandemic, during the pandemic, in particular, when everything kind of came to a head, I really wanted to be explicit about that throughout the text, which was definitely not there before. I think there could have been connections made without them being actually said, but I think that that's definitely one of the biggest shifts, as well as the whole ungrading movement sort of coming in on the tails of that, and the community itself growing. So stretching my thinking as I'm reading all the stuff other people are doing, the different ways of approaching the same thing and achieving the same end, but with a variety of different ways of getting there. And just, I really tried to pay tribute to the other folks I've come in contact with over the years who have stretched my thinking, and just different things I've seen in the classroom, as well as that really big heart of relationships. I think, in Assessing with Respect, which was my last book with ASCD, there's a whole focus on social emotional learning too. So pulling that in
Right.
as another arm of this assessment work, and how the equity piece and also the social emotional piece all tie into assessment and how we feel about ourselves as learners. And I really wanted that to be clear when people were reading this new version.
It's so interesting too, Star. And one of the things that I so much value in the work that you do is the expansion, as you started to suggest, and how people continue to push your thinking, but the vibrancy you have from a social media perspective. Can you talk a little bit about the role of the groups that you sort of have continued to create a community around, and how that continues to influence some of your thinking and perhaps some of the examples that we were sharing in this second edition?
Yeah, so the teachers throwing out grade group, like Mark Barnes had started that, and we connected early on because he was doing this work for a long time. And at that time, Corwin had done their Connected Educator series. He did a couple of books. I did a book about blogging, and that's when we met for the first time in person at ISTE, like what
Mhm.
feels like a million years ago. And he thought I would be a good fit for that community, and then invited me to write Hacking Assessment when he started doing the Hack Learning series. And from that group, like, I got to test out my own ideas when I was in the classroom. Like, here's what I'm doing, this is how it's working, this is when it didn't work. Does anybody have workarounds for that? And then as I've evolved and kind of moved out of the classroom and I was rethinking the hacks for the new book, I wanted to honor the folks who contributed the first time, because their stories are no less, no less thoughtful or evocative or helpful in understanding the ideas. But
Mm.
I also wanted them to all be from people who are current practitioners, who have read the first book, implemented it in their own way, and then had something to add. And a lot of those people did come from that group, and then the teachers going gradeless group as well,
Yeah.
that Arthur and Aaron lead. And that community is brilliant and vibrant as well. And I'm just a member of that community with a lot of other really smart people too. And then, it's crazy as a teacher when you get involved with social media. And when I started getting involved, it was still like developing for educators. I can't even believe it's been more than a decade. I think I've been on Twitter for like almost 15 years already. And it was because of that exposure in that setting that my thinking actually started getting pushed, because I wasn't getting support from where I was physically. And as I was finding my people and building my network, social media was the outlet. And then I started blogging, and, that kind of took on a life of its own as well. And
It,
I
it,
know it's not, sorry.
no, no, I mean, because it's fascinating too, because there are so many people that feel like they're islands within their school community, but they find such power and vibrancy in connecting to a PLN. And I think the other interesting part is you as an author now have an opportunity to sort of play out ideas in real time, not only because there was part of it you were in the classroom, and part of it we can talk in the later part in the interview about what you're up to now. But I think the idea of it being continually to be field tested and expanded upon in real time.
I think when I started using social media, like I was always a very experimental teacher. Like after years 1 to 5, when I was like in panic mode all the time, just trying to figure out what end was up, once I kind of got my footing about me, like always wanting to serve the kids that I was with the best, and knowing that to really promote continual learning in my students, that was something that needed to be evident in my own practice.
Mm.
They needed to see me reflecting, they needed to see me making mistakes. And I think that that's also part of, like, my brand, so to speak. Most people have felt like they've known me over the years because of how transparent I've been. And, this is star authentic as it's going to get, whether it's, making a mistake, kind of having that gaffe, being reflective about it, being very vocal about it.
Yeah.
I'm more uncomfortable, surprisingly, sharing successes when they happen. I'm almost more comfortable in that space of like, yeah, that didn't go the way that I thought it would. But, you know, um, I think it's so important in education that we have people with authentic voices sharing everything. Like, there's no harm in being vulnerable and saying, you know what, I thought this was going to work out well. It was like it was horrible, or I had a really bad day today. I yelled at a student that had nothing to do with what even happened, but I'm a human being. How do I correct that scenario in the future and make it a learning moment for both of us? And I think that that's part of the reason why my work has always resonated with people, and I'm grateful for that, because it's a little scary the first few times you put yourself out there vulnerably
That's
to
right.
say, you know, yeah,
Yeah,
well,
and so I mean, we talked about the idea between the span of edition 1 and edition 2, which is going to be out on Tuesday, I believe, August 2nd.
yep, that's correct.
So the one last thread, so we talked a little bit about equity and community and your reflection and authentic voice. But I think the third part that I really sort of tuned into in the second edition is the pace of change. And
Mhm.
I can imagine that even within the PLNs that were sort of evolved over the past 6 or 7 years, you actually can start to see the changes or the shifts in individuals within that community. But
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful, just to end our first segment, to talk a little bit about the idea of the collective challenge and giving the necessary information, but also space for that evolution to happen.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing. One thing I've learned since I started doing this work is like grading is one of those things, and assessment are really deeply embedded in the institutionalized version of education. And changing things that are so central to that old model is really, really hard work, especially when you've grown up in it. It may have worked really well for you because you were the kind of student who played school really well, or the opposite of it. I've worked with a lot of teachers who are like, I was not a good student. So this model would have been great for me when I was in school. And I think that everybody kind of has to have their own aha moment, and then however that evolution looks for them after, wherever their entry point was. I think giving the space to people, and I say this at the beginning of every session I do at a conference. My job is to not make you change your mind to see things the way I see them. My job is to shine light on what your current practices are and have you leave here thinking about them.
Mhm.
So whether or not you wholesale believe everything I'm saying and you want to try it all, and that's awesome if that's you. As long as you walk out saying to yourself, you know what, I could do that a little differently, or maybe what I'm doing isn't best for all my kids. Maybe it works for a small group of my kids who are super successful in that kind of assessment paradigm. But I really try to take an approach when I'm working with teachers to honor the experience they bring
Yeah.
and their process for moving through the next part. So there's no one right way to do it, the same way that I would never expect any two students to do something the same exact way. I
Yeah, and I
wouldn't
was
expect
interested in the story. I think it was an assistant superintendent in Delaware starting
Mhm.
to talk about the notion of the strategic view, because it's one thing to continue to sort of help shine a light on individual teacher practice, but it's a whole nother kettle of fish to begin to step back and think about it from a school or a district level perspective in helping not only the admin and teachers begin to imagine and make that shift, which includes very much the guidance counselors, but also
Right.
families as well, to begin to feel like they will get better or more or clearer information on how their child is doing without it impacting their um, aspirations for or with their children.
I'm really glad that you brought up the hack from Hack 2. My friend, when I was rethinking how I wanted to reimagine that stakeholder buy-in chapter in particular, because so many people have come to me over the years and like, I want to do this, but I'm doing it alone. I don't have support from my leaders. They don't even know how to support me, which is kind of also how the leadership tips sort of got sprinkled in there as well. Something I've learned over time is that leaders sometimes just don't have the instructional capacity to support. Not that they don't want to, but they just don't know because they didn't do this. This isn't the way they think.
Right.
And working with a district like the one in Delaware that I work with, who are super progressive, thoughtful leaders who are leading the charge with their teachers now, because I continue to support that district. Like, it's been a very holistic sort of bringing in stakeholders, getting feedback, making decisions on a 5-year timeline, as opposed to, like, I have this great idea I want to change. Everybody has to change next school year before ever giving them an opportunity to
Right.
really understand why the change is happening and what that could look like in their classrooms and what the implications of those things are going to be. And I think that that's one of the biggest struggles with this kind of work in general is somebody finds a piece of something they could really grab onto. They want to make change fast because they see the value, but what they don't realize is by going fast, you're going to destroy it before it starts.
One of the things that I'm sort of reflecting on is, especially when it came to sort of working on personalized learning,
Hmm.
as a shift in mindset in terms of the kind of learning experiences that we were hoping for students. And I think it's the same in the work that you're doing. Initiative is the kiss of death. I mean, you can't start with the idea of this will be implemented in the next 8 months. So we're going to carve out reading this book, and then by the end of 8 months, we will have reimagined our grading and reporting system. it really, not only does it really not work that way, but the notion of starting to create a level of energy and vibrancy, it's like a little sprout that needs to grow, that has to have a little protective cage to begin to say, how can we protect people that are sort of being in this kind of innovative space, but at the
Yep.
same time, making it again as reflective and open and transparent as possible to see to what extent can we actually tend the soil and make it more fertile.
I mean, I think that that's what I have learned doing this work now for such a long time is grading initiatives, in particular assessment initiatives. You get really one good shot at it in a decade because if it goes bad, people don't forget.
That's right.
And then you have to wait until there's
They
another
have, they have the
turnover.
scars.
Right. And it's true, and it's done poorly so often that almost everyone has a bad standards-based grading experience that they could share how their district did it wrong, or just didn't have the right supports, or didn't have the right, like, the community didn't really understand. So it's a pretty substantial shift that requires really big system thinking.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you can't do it in a single classroom. I certainly did it in a single classroom, but it's significantly harder to do it alone than if you're doing it as a community where parents can't play you against your colleagues because you're all moving in the same direction. And communities can't have, like, be up in arms over one or two things they just don't understand. And if at the beginning of that conversation, it was opened up to the community to say, hey, what are your fears and concerns with all of this? How can we address those concerns in a meaningful way that's going to help you be really satisfied with the choices that we're making instead of threatened by them in some way?
Well, it's just been such a joy to have you. This is the end of our first segment. So down below, we'll include STAR's PLN information. So if you want to join one of her communities, and also a link to the Amazon book title, Hacking Assessment, second edition. Thanks, Star.
Thanks.